Examination of a Cerebral Narcissist, Part 1. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. You will know from my work, which helps you understand narcissism and psychopathy, that when it comes to narcissists, I categorize them into schools and cadres. But the schools, lesser, mid-range, greater, and ultra, lesser being divided into 4 categories, mid-range divided into 4 subcategories, and greater 3. And also, of course, the cadres, of which there are 4. The most common, somatic, then the next common, elite, and then victim and cerebral. Cerebral narcissists, in the scheme of things, are comparatively rarer beasts. The cerebral narcissist is marked out by having an interest in matters of art, film, literature. Somebody has a keen interest in politics, perhaps, world events, current affairs, music, an individual who reads extensively and is well read. They may well get involved in charitable activities. They possibly have an interest in crafts and design, sculpture, photography, interior design, doing puzzles. They might have interests in philosophy, debating, history. The individual, of course, as a cerebral narcissist, will engage in sexual activity, but they regard it more as a sense of duty and are more likely to want to utilize, because it caters with that rejection of intimacy, sex in a more remote way. Often, perhaps, being individuals that would like to watch somebody else masturbate as they do themselves, or possibly see their partner have sex with somebody else while they masturbate, directing it. In other instances, it may be the case that they prefer to engage in sexting and dirty talk down a telephone, rather than actually getting down and making the beast with 2 backs. There are lots of indicators that demonstrate cerebral narcissists, but since they're not as common as the somatic and elite, it's not the case that one necessarily comes across as many of them in the wild, so to speak. Here is an opportunity, as a consequence of an article that appears in the New Yorker, to examine an individual which shows various indicators of both being a narcissist and, of course, of the cadre of being cerebral. And I'm going to read the article to you, identifying the relevant narcissistic indicators vis-à-vis behavior and cerebral activity, to provide you with a worked example of a cerebral narcissist to further your understanding. The article is about Agnes Callard and is described as a marriage of the minds. It's by Rachel Aviv. The philosopher, the fact that she's a philosopher, is a cerebral indicator. She lives with her husband and her ex-husband, searches for what one human can be to another human. The fact that there appears to be some sort of ménage à trois also hints as a sense of entitlement, agreed, if you will, for fuel by having 2 partners there. Quite how it works, well, we'll find out as we read on. Arnold Brooks, a graduate student at the University of Chicago, came to Agnes Callard's office hours every week to talk about Aristotle. Cerebral activity. At the last session of the quarter in the spring of 2011, they discussed Aristotle's treatise, Metaphysics, and what it meant to be one, as opposed to more than one. It was the sort of question where I felt it would be reasonable to feel ecstatic if you made some kind of progress, Arnold told me. Agnes was the only person he'd ever met who seemed to feel the same way. Mirroring. Agnes specializes in ancient philosophy and ethics, cerebral activities, but she's also a public philosopher, cerebral activity, writing popular essays, cerebral activity, about experiences such as jealousy, parenting, and anger, that feel to her like dissociated matter, falling outside the realm of existing theories. She is often baffled by the human conventions that the rest of us have accepted. This shows, of course, a disconnect between the way that she looks at the world and the way that other people, non-narcissists, behave. It seems to her that we are all intuitively copying one another, adopting the same set of arbitrary behaviours and values, as if by osmosis. How has it come to pass, she writes, that we take ourselves to have any inkling at all about how to live? She was married to another philosophy professor at the University of Chicago, Ben Callard, and they had 2 young sons. To celebrate the end of the term, Agnes had made cookies for her students. Triangulation with object, bribery, and she gave an extra one to Arnold, a 27-year-old with wavy hair that fell to his shoulders, who was in his first year of the graduate program in philosophy. As Arnold ate the cookie, Agnes, who was 35, noticed that he had just this incredibly weird expression on his face. I couldn't understand that expression. I'd never seen it before. She asked why he was making that face. "I think I'm a little bit in love with you," he responded. Agnes had felt that there was something slightly odd about her weekly sessions with Arnold, but she hadn't been sure what it was. Now, the nature of the oddness became apparent. "I think I'm in love with you too," she told him. Lack of boundary recognition, transgression of professional boundary, mirroring, and of course the product of her narcissism causing her to believe that she's in love with him. They both agreed that nothing could happen. They leaned out of her window and smoked a cigarette. Then Arnold left her office. The next day, Agnes and her sons flew to New York to visit her parents. Ben had gone to Philadelphia to see his mother, who was recovering from surgery. On the plane, Agnes said, "It felt like I was having a revelation in the clouds." For the first time in her life, she felt as if she had access to a certain inner experience of love, grandiosity, magical thinking, a state that made her feel as if there was suddenly a moral grail, a better kind of person to be, grandiosity. She realized that within her marriage, she didn't have this experience. If she stayed married, she would be pretending. Narcissism, of course, is causing her to devalue her marriage by wanting her to see it as something that wasn't of merit any longer. When she landed, she told her parents that she had to get divorced. Notice the manner in which this has happened. She has no relationship with this young man. They have not had sex. They haven't talked about a future. They haven't been seeing one another. They haven't got to know one another. But all of a sudden, the interaction that she's had with him has caused her to believe that her marriage is kaput and that it's over and that she ought to have a divorce. Notice also that she hasn't said anything at all to her husband, demonstrating a lack of fidelity towards him and a lack of accountability for the relationship. Instead, she feels that it is appropriate to speak to her mother about it. "We didn't think it made any sense," her mother Judith Gelland said. Naturally, of course, it doesn't. We had seen Agnes and Ben a couple of weeks earlier for a long weekend, and it seemed like everything was great. This, of course, demonstrates the black and white thinking of the narcissist being able to switch from everything apparently being okay to all of a sudden requiring a divorce. Agnes' sister, Katja Gelland, a professor of German studies at Duke, said, "I love Ben, who is really generous in every sense of the word, an impossible person to dislike, and I just felt like, no, this can't be right." Of her marriage, Agnes said, "There were no problems. We never fought. We just got along really well. We talked a lot about philosophy, cerebral activity." The next morning, she took a train to Philadelphia to tell Ben, who specialized in the philosophy of mind, language, and mathematics, how she felt. "We talked for an entire day," she said. "I was approaching him with like, here's what's happened, what should we do?" The conversation felt so honest that she realized she had probably never felt so close to Ben in her life. Notice again the grandiosity and the magical thinking that's occurring here, that she's going to tell him that the marriage is over, but nevertheless, "I now feel really close to you." He encouraged her to take time before making a decision. She agreed to try therapy. But the next morning Ben called and said that she was right. They should get a divorce. "I think we both trusted each other enough in the crisis moment to listen to the other person and take seriously what they were saying," Ben told me. So to that extent, it was connected to millions of other conversations we've had. She was just showing me the same things she had seen. Once I saw them, it sort of clicked, and everything became very clear. He described Agnes as the least complacent person I've ever met. Agnes was extremely upset that the divorce would harm their children. False contrition, false compassion. But she felt that the alternative was that she would become a bad person, sense of entitlement. Note that she's not putting the interests of her children before her, but her interest before that of the children. I thought that I would become sort of corrupted by staying in a marriage where I no longer felt like I was aspirational about it. The point is that marriages are not meant to be aspirational. They are meant to be a union of two individuals who respect one another as a consequence of their emotional empathy. Of course, she doesn't see it that way because through her narcissism, it's a means for her to get to the prime aims. Her friends and relatives suggested that she just have an affair, but that felt impossible. It's like you have this vision of this wonderful grand possibility, and then you decide to play at it, treating it like a vacation or something. It seemed like a desecration of that vision. Again, notice that the way that the relationship is being spoken about, the terms in which it's viewed, is demonstrative of her magical thinking and her sense of entitlement, but also the cerebral outlook, the flowery language that is being used. I will continue the examination of this situation to help you understand more about the way that a cerebral narcissist behaves in part 2. Join me there.